Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Light Up Your Metabolism podcast. Today, my guest Joanne Kennedy and I are going to talk about histamine. I am seeing so much information about histamine, so many of my clients. Now I'm sort of discovering that they have histamine issues, and I myself have experienced histamine issues as of late because I'm doing a mold detox. And I always thought for me, histamine manifested as like allergy symptoms like a runny nose, scratchy throat, sneezing, things like that. But there are so many more symptoms that can indicate the presence of high histamine. And a lot of these symptoms actually have a huge crossover with hypoglycemia symptoms, things like headaches and anxiety. And I always thought that that was more like a sympathetic response, but now I'm seeing that maybe some of the people who are having these blood sugar low feelings, it may be histamine and it may not be low blood sugar, but it could be a combination of both, unfortunately. And it's really interesting when I talked with Joanne to just see how many body systems that histamine can impact. It has impacts on our digestive system, on our hormones, on our moods, on so many things. So this episode is really going to give us a deep dive into how histamine symptoms show up and due to things like, for example, mold exposure or even how stress can impact our histamine levels. And histamine, it's not something we want to get rid of. We need it, but we also want to have it in proper amounts and make sure the body can get rid of it. So we're going to dive into all these topics today, but I wanted to tell you a little bit more about Joanne before we dived in. So Joanne Kennedy is a naturopath and specialist in histamine intolerance, MTHFR, and methylation. She runs a successful clinical practice in Sydney, Australia, and sees patients online globally. Her approach is to identify the root cause of illness with the use of functional pathology testing, assessing the biochemical individuality of each patient, as well as genetic testing if required. She's the author of a book on histamine intolerance and also leads an online group coaching program educating fellow practitioners on histamine and methylation. And I've left all her links in the show notes, so hopefully you can dive into those and contact Joanne if you feel like she is the right practitioner to help you support your histamine issues. So without any further ado, let's dive into the interview with Joanne Kennedy. Joanne, welcome to the Light Up Your Metabolism podcast. I'm so excited to dive into a highly requested topic about histamine today. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Oh, you're welcome, Danielle. It's a pleasure to talk to you and to your audience.
Yeah, so let's dive in about what is histamine. And I hear this a lot, like what is histamine intolerance? Let's, I guess, start there.
Yeah, good question. So histamine is a biogenic amine. So that biogenic means it's made by all living organisms. Okay, so humans make histamine. It's part of our biochemistry. Plants, animals, we all do, right? And amine means it's made from an amino acid. Okay, so that's just a bit sciencey, right? But the point is the human body makes histamine, and it's extremely important for so many things. It's vital to the inflammatory immune response. So when there is a threat, whether a virus, bacteria, or a toxin coming into our body causes inflammation, histamine gets released as part of the inflammatory cascade, and it's there to widen capillaries to allow for white blood cells and platelets to go in and repair and fix. Okay, so super important part of our immune system. It also is involved in respiratory system. It's involved in breathing, vasodilation, vasoconstriction. It's really important for making hydrochloric acid in the gut. Okay, and so this is interesting. A lot of symptoms of high histamine is actually heartburn, but we need histamine to make hydrochloric acid. It's also involved in the women's reproduction. It actually increases estrogen release from the ovaries. It's normal to do that. It's involved in constriction of smooth muscle, so it is involved in labor. Okay, it's also a neurotransmitter, which is a really interesting thing. Yeah.
Why didn't I know that?
Yeah. So in the brain, it's helpful for learning and memory, wakefulness. It helps promote the release of serotonin and dopamine and adrenaline. So it has a really important role in mood regulation. And so when we understand what histamine does in the body, when levels become too high, it affects those systems. Right. And so the intolerance thing is a good question. I think we just call it histamine intolerance. Look, it's just what I learned years ago and I've sort of stuck with it. It's like the body makes more histamine than it can break down. And then the interesting thing is that the word intolerance, I think, also just stemmed from the fact that there are a lot of foods high in histamine. And so when you've got too much histamine in your body already, you're not going to be able to break down those foods properly, because there is one enzyme that does that, which is the DAO enzyme. So if it's overloaded with histamine being produced in the body for various reasons, you eat a tomato, which is high in histamine, and you react. So the whole intolerance, the way that people are talking about histamine intolerance is often, I think it does stem from the fact that people are intolerant to the foods. But we broadly just say it's just high, I'll say in my writing, high histamine or histamine intolerance, but essentially you're making too much histamine and your body can't break it down properly, and you'll come out with an adverse reaction.
So, what are some of the possible reactions that someone could be manifesting? I'm sure there's a lot of symptoms. You've already listed some for
Yeah.
us, but what are the symptoms that someone would know they're having high levels of
Yeah.
histamine?
Yep.
And then you said that we can get it from food and other places. So let's go there next.
Yeah. Okay. Some histamine symptoms are in the brain. It's going to cause headaches to migraines, and that whole spectrum, headache to migraine, dizziness to vertigo. It can cause anxiety, depression, insomnia, motion sickness and nausea, and an inability to control your body temperature. In the respiratory tract, it definitely contributes to like the sinus issues, shortness of breath, asthma. It can cause issues with the gut. It can cause reflux, heartburn, loose stools, abdominal pain, bloating. It can cause issues with the skin, hives, eczema, itchy skin, dermatitis, as well as acne. It's really interesting. It's a major cause of acne. Women's hormones, it has a really interesting effect on estrogen. Okay, so it stimulates estrogen, but if you've got too much histamine, you can produce more estrogen than you'd like. Okay, and this is why women will often have histamine symptoms of migraines, are classic, at ovulation when estrogen's peaking, or before menstruation when it drops. And so it's very, very common for women to have a worsening of their histamine symptoms at ovulation or before menstruation. And in the perimenopause phase, you might not ever have had histamine symptoms before, but due to the drop in progesterone compared to estrogen, you can start getting histamine symptoms. Okay, so there is a lot of histamine symptoms, and we just have to understand it's so common because what causes ill health? It's inflammation. And histamine is released when there's inflammation. And then we've got histamine receptors all over our body, and it will stimulate too much histamine and cause many symptoms. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting. It's so systemic, and there is a lot of crossover with some of these, like we were talking off air before we started, this crossover between hypoglycemic symptoms and histamine issues like the headaches, vertigo, brain fog, anxiety,
Yeah.
is specifically those.
Yeah. It causes
That's really
heart palpitations, shortness of
Yes.
breath. Yeah, no, it's interesting. When histamine gets high in the brain, it increases noradrenaline or norepinephrine. Not sure what Americans. It's noradrenaline, norepinephrine.
Yeah.
That sends we go into fight and flight when that's released in the brain.
Yes.
Then the adrenals start to release adrenaline. And what happens when we release adrenaline? We increase cortisol. Okay, a major endocrine disruptor, and we'll start pulling glycogen storage from the liver and the muscles, causing symptoms of hypoglycemia. Yeah. It can make people feel low blood pressure as well. So sometimes there's a crossover with the symptoms. So yes, histamine also can cause a increased release of insulin from the pancreas. That coupled with generalized inflammation, which really impacts metabolism generally. You'd know way more about that than me, but just general metabolism. And then we've got that increase in cortisol. So the combination of all that can be hypoglycemic symptoms.
Yes.
How I would look at that with a patient in front of me, I'd look at what they were eating,
Okay.
and then I'd look at, do they have other histamine symptoms? Like, are they just a histamine bucket? And do they also have a lot of the causes of high histamine, which I'll talk about in a minute? So if someone's got headaches and migraines and skin issues and bad PMS, like histamine symptoms with their hormones, I'd be like, what's going on with your hypoglycemic symptoms? Let's get your histamines down and try and stabilize your blood sugar with diet or whatever, and just see if we can get on top of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a feeling that there's just certain people looking back where I now question, I'm like, was this more of a histamine response, especially post-meal hypoglycemia, where they're feeling like it's a reactive hypoglycemia,
Yeah,
but their blood
interesting.
sugar is in the normal range. So this is this is exciting for me
Yeah.
because I think and I'd love to hear. So you said the causes of
Yeah.
this, like people who are at a higher risk of it, because we're trying to, as clinicians, we have to understand the full picture because there are so many symptoms that could mean so many different things. And so it's really about finding the pattern that's jumping out. And of course, these things could be co-occurring,
Yeah.
but we want to know, like, okay, are we looking at both things to address? Are we, is it really just a histamine issue and the blood sugar is fine, but you're feeling like your blood sugar is crashing because you're getting heart palpitations and anxiety and brain fog and headaches? Like, all of those are classic blood sugar symptoms. So I'm excited to start to weed this out. So let's dive into those causes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be
So the
great.
interesting thing about histamine, it is caused from the major things that we see in clinic. And I know in the US as well, Australia's US, same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like stress causes a reduction in your hydrochloric acid. This is a big thing, right? And then other causes of low HCl, such as proton pump inhibitors, right? Without hydrochloric acid, you cannot break down your food properly, particularly your protein. It'll sit, rot, and ferment in the gut, and it will increase histamine. At the same time, it can lead to B12 deficiency. Without enough B12, you don't methylate properly, and methylation is really important for breaking down histamine, particularly in the central nervous system. Then you've got issues with, hydrochloric acid. It's interesting. It is the conductor of the other digestive enzymes. It sends a message to the pancreas to take pancreatic juice into the small intestine that alkalizes the small bowel. An alkaline environment is where pancreatic enzymes will work in an alkaline environment. It also sends a message to the gallbladder to release bile into the small bowel. Now, if that's not happening properly, you're going to end up with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, a major cause of high histamine. Okay, so then we've got all the causes of SIBO: digestive enzyme insufficiency, eating processed foods, too many antibiotics, eating on the run, eating in front of your computer, stress, right? So this is just what we see. Okay, and then we've got mold is a big cause.
Sorry, I just want to just pause at, okay, we're leaving off on mold, but I need to go back and address what you just said because I am so thankful to hear another practitioner talking about the importance of HCl. And this is, and as I call it, the linchpin of the digestive tract. It is the most important thing to get right in digestion because, like you said, it's like that conductor. Without proper HCl, it's going to affect every single step of digestion below it. And then we're going to get insufficient breakdown of our food. And for me, from a blood sugar perspective, it's so interesting that this is like so important for histamine. It's not surprising because it's important for everything, right? We need to get nutrients out of the food that we eat. So for me, if we're not breaking down our food properly, we're not getting adequate absorption of proteins and fats, which are going to stabilize our blood sugar. And then so for you, it's like we need to get this proper breakdown because we don't want to get, like, this can all lead to high histamine symptoms. Would you say there's a relation because I know that when we don't have proper HCl, we don't break down our proteins well. And then once in the small intestine, the immune system sees these like peptides and undigested proteins and then overreacts.
Yeah.
And that's the histamine
Yeah.
response.
It's just an
Okay.
immune response. It doesn't
Yes.
understand
Okay.
what's this carrot. I don't know. It doesn't understand
Yeah.
food. But this is
Yes.
food intolerances. This is why when people
Yeah.
are sent to do these food intolerance tests, it's like, no, what's going on with your digestion? We need to work there
Totally.
first. Yeah,
And do you find, Joanne, that people are so obsessed? This is what I get. The message is like, you need to work on your gut and your gut health. And so they come in and they're like, I'm taking probiotics. Maybe they're taking prebiotics, but that's for the lower gut. Those are the last steps of digestion.
last steps. And often if you get
Yeah.
SIBO under control and you get the digestive enzymes in, then you don't need to be dealing with the lower bowel. And this is
Yeah.
large bowel dysbiosis does not cause a lot of histamine problems. It doesn't. And this is like 10 years of doing this, and so many people come to me with stool tests. Yes, the research says Klebsiella, Citrobacter release histamine. You try and just like get those down with some herbs, it just doesn't do anything because it's not the underlying cause. It really isn't. And the thing with SIBO, well, it takes FODMAPs, which are the food for the large bowel, and converts them into gas. So if you don't fix SIBO, you're not really fixing like the dysbiotic large intestine. So I'm like, I mean, look, when I was at university, we just learned about the large bowel. We didn't learn about SIBO really. And then when I started in clinical, this was 10 to 12 years ago now. But when I started in clinical practice, I'm like, far out, like you just start using, you have to use your, we're not studying, you got to use your brain and you just look at what's in front of you. It's like, oh yeah, you got to chew your food and you got to break it down and you need HCl. And then what happens is, what was really interesting to me, I was using this digestive enzyme that had brush border enzymes, and people used to I didn't know why they loved it so much. And I'm like, why do people love this probiotic, this digestive enzyme so much? It's because it's got brush border enzymes, and brush border enzymes work on the small intestine. And so I was like, they were getting so many results from that. And I was like, what's going on with the small bowel? And then I sort of got into SIBO. And then I understood that the DAO enzyme that breaks down histamine is highly concentrated in the small bowel. And so it's like put two and two together and it's like the SIBO is a really big problem. It's a really big problem for histamine. Yeah, so it's just sort of, I just sort of wove together a lot of the information because people don't learn about this at university, and I had to sort of piece it together myself through research and clinical practice. But that's when I started to understand it's the upper gut issues that are causing most of the problem with the gut. And so taking probiotics is usually a waste of money.
I am like, you are speaking my language, and I'm so happy to hear this. Like, we're at different ends of the world, and this is what the most compelling, interesting, mind-blowing thing that I say that I learned in nutritional therapy school was how the digestive tract worked. And we learned heavily all about the upper digestion, just as you were talking about. And so, as just to recap, stress lowers hydrochloric acid, eating on the go, not chewing properly, standing and eating. I'm a classic stand and eater, so I've been trying to like really sit down, chew my food, put my fork down between bites. And then things like age, we lose HCl as we age. So many people have H. pylori, like that lowers stomach acid. And then a lot of times a plant-based diet, unfortunately, we're not getting the B12 and the zinc that we need to create the HCl. So then all of digestion fire kind of lowers. And so I just worked with someone just before this call who has a history of a vegan diet. And she's like, I haven't been able to get my B12 back up. I'm like, because you don't have enough stomach acid. So yes, super foundational for so many things. So, okay, now let's move on to mold. Thank you.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, mold is, the hidden culprit of so many issues. It really depletes immune system function. A lot of mold species are penicillin. So what's that? That's like taking an antibiotic every day. So it really disrupts the microbiome. Mold at its worst will cause chronic inflammatory response syndrome, CIRS. where there's like you've got the innate immune system kicks in, and then the adaptive immune system is meant to start around day 4, day 5, and that does not happen. Fascinating. Antibodies are not produced. So what happens is the innate immune system, which contains all your white blood cells and inflammatory cytokines and mast cells, don't get switched off. They stay high. Right? So how you can so when you first get sick, you get really sick quickly, like fever and really unwell, and like it's like an acute thing, and then the adaptive immune system kicks in and it starts to it's like the special services, and it's really robust and it's very efficient. That does not happen. And so you have this chronic inflammation, and mast cells are involved in that, releasing histamine. Okay, that's chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Then we've also got mast cell activation syndrome, which is where there's an uncontrolled release of histamine and other inflammatory mediators from mast cells. Mold can also cause that. But mold can also just cause gut disruption, generalized inflammation, and a release of histamine. The other thing that mold will do, it really disrupts bile flow. Okay, and then what you have the knock-on effect of SIBO, or oxalates are a big deal. So oxalates, oxalates are in a lot of plant foods. And when we consume oxalates, we need a really healthy gut, a really healthy microbiome to break them down. We also need healthy bile flow. We need calcium, magnesium to bind up the oxalates. Mold disrupts bile flow, which can cause problems with oxalate. And there are some mold species that actually contain oxalate. So many people come to me having done mold treatments and they're still unwell. It's because they're full of oxalate. Yeah. And the thing with oxalate, this is the terrible, terrible thing with this, it depletes the body of sulfur. Without sulfur, you can't make glutathione effectively. It's just a massive thing. It lowers your homocysteine.
I have a client who I need to talk to you about. Keep going.
So the thing with then what happens? Homocysteine, which is used for methylation, it's a storage molecule for sulfur. So we need homocysteine to make SAMe, the methyl donor for methylation, and then homocysteine also stores sulfur. So when the body's desperate for sulfur, it gets it from homocysteine, and this is why you see levels drop in the blood test. Okay, because it's getting sulfur from homocysteine, and your levels will drop. This is so when someone has low homocysteine, you stop and you focus in on that, because if it's a mold and oxalate problem, they're very sick, and that's where you need to start. In my opinion, because you can't, if you've got mold, I mean, you know how bad it can be. Plus, if you've got an oxalate problem, you're depleting your sulfur, and sulfur helps make mucin in the gut. It makes glycosaminoglycans, which is like the ligaments. It helps make your digestive enzymes. It's involved in the detoxification pathway of sulfation, and it makes glutathione and many other things. So it's super important. So mold's complex. I'm like the mold whisperer. I pick it up. I can smell it a mile away on my patients, but I don't treat it. I'm fortunate I've got a colleague who is a mold specialist who she works with me. She had mold illness herself, which is why I refer to her, and oxalate. So she sees the mold people. I'm now studying it. I'm doing a course on it. But unless you've had mold yourself, it's such a nuanced thing. I think the practitioners that have had mold illness themselves are usually the best at doing it. But it is a real problem. It's the medical world still don't really believe that it's a real thing, but it's extremely common, and I see so many patients that have it.
So I have a client who is working with, you're familiar with Sally Norton, oxalate queen, right? So she's working with Sally to get her oxalates down, and she has this thing where someone would come over and she could tell, like, oh, my son's friend definitely washed his clothes with a dryer sheet, and she would be up all night vomiting, like all night, and by the end of the time working together, I'm like, you're not detoxifying. There's something happening here. So I'm starting to get the picture that her bile flow is definitely impacted. We're trying to get her, the bile flowing better. We're doing a lot of I'm just like looking at things like methylation, and we're trying to increase, I'm looking at binders. I'm like, we need to get you tested for mold because there are certain species that make
Yeah.
oxalates. And, I think it's a whole complicated
Yes.
thing. So
Yes. So
now she's,
multiple chemical
yeah.
sensitivities, big time mold problem, and sulfur depletion.
Yes.
So they don't. It's the sulfation pathway and the glutathione. But the organic acids test from Mosaic will test for oxalates, some mold species, and look at your glutathione levels. But testing homocysteine is such a great thing you can easily do. And if it's low, it's very often due to mold and oxalates.
Okay.
And it means that they're
Helpful.
deplete of sulfur and that they really need sulfur.
Okay. And how do you replace sulfur in people, or how do you get it up? Sulfur
Interestingly,
vegetables?
no. So interestingly, sulfur will convert into sulfate through complex biochemistry.
Yeah.
And these people have problems with doing that. Epsom salt baths are sulfate.
Yes.
So Epsom salt baths can help get your sulfate levels up, which will work on the sulfation detoxification pathway. And it's sometimes tricky to get. The thing that happens with oxalates also, and this is fascinating, the other place that the body will get sulfur from is the gut microbiome. It can start increasing the production of sulfur producing bacteria. Yeah. So people have too much sulfur in the gut, but they're not using it. And so they can become intolerant to sulfur foods. And they often don't tolerate N-acetylcysteine or glutathione or methionine, the sulfur amino acids and molecules. It's interesting. So yes, in theory, we go in with NAC or glutathione, and some people can tolerate it, but some people can't. And you would question that what symptoms they're actually getting from taking a sulfur molecule or amino acid. And if that's the case, it's like the gut microbiome is increasing the production of sulfur producers.
So what does it look like when you don't tolerate glutathione, for example?
It's a good question, because a lot of people just don't tolerate it because their detoxification is just so stuffed up. It would be a worsening of any of their symptoms, pre-existing symptoms, severe fatigue, malaise. Yeah. But you just have to go really slowly.
Okay.
But it's just understanding why we think, why can't someone tolerate glutathione? Look, it can be many things. They could just have heavy metals that they haven't dealt with, or their detoxification is just really blocked, or they're chronically constipated. Because you're just upregulating the detoxification. It's going into the gut,
and then not able to drain.
Yeah. But it's just when someone has low homocysteine and an oxalate problem, you deal with the oxalates, deal with the oxalates, and then you will stop reducing. So oxalates based in a complex way will reduce the amount of sulfur. You'll weigh out the sulfur. You'll urinate out your sulfur. So if you deal with the oxalate problem, you'll stop doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, so let's circle back to oxalates later, because I want to hear how you work with, reducing them, because I know that you can't just like pull out all the oxalates in one shot. So, so let's keep going with other causes of histamine issues. So we talked about low HCl that reduced digestion in the upper digestion, mold, oxalates. What else do you have?
SIBO, Helicobacter pylori can do it. Crohn's disease, right? Ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease just wipes out the microvilli. So that's where the DAO enzyme that breaks down histamine resides. And then methylation issues, like methylation does break down histamine by the histamine N-methyltransferase enzyme. So people with disrupted methylation can have a problem breaking down histamine. And then estrogen, oh my God, like estrogen increases histamine like nothing. Like histaminergic neurons in the brain have estrogen receptors. So when estrogen gets into the brain, as it should, if you've got too much estrogen in the brain and or your histamine bucket's already a bit high, it's going to increase the firing of the histamine from these histaminergic neurons.
Okay.
Okay, so estrogen will do it. Mast cells contain estrogen receptors as well. Okay, so mast cells will get stimulated by estrogen to degranulate, release histamine. And then estrogen downregulates the DAO enzyme that breaks down histamine. So it's just, and then
Yeah.
histamine stimulates the ovaries to release estrogen. And then if you've got too much histamine, it can release too much estrogen. So it's a really
Wow.
vicious
So it's a
link.
really bad cycle.
Yeah, it's a really bad
Wow.
cycle.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, the other one is Marcons. So people in the
I have
mold,
that.
yeah, people in the mold world know about Marcons. You know, it's you've got inflammation, you've got bacteria and yeast and mold in your nose and biofilm. It's going to increase histamine. People with neurological histamine issues, I'm like, even if they say, "Oh, my nose isn't that bad," I'll just hone in on it. You sure? Sniffles? Do you wake up tired? Do you not breathe properly for your nose? Like, just because dealing with Marcons is so important for dealing with neurological histamine symptoms. Really extremely important. I think it's clinically what I've seen in the past 2 years. It's like one of the major cause that I've seen. Yes, we've got gut-brain axis, and yes, we've got estrogen getting into the brain, but I
But
find that
that's
the
right there.
Marcons things, it's right. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't believe how few symptoms I have, considering I have very high levels of certain molds
Yeah.
and Marcons.
You're lucky.
And yeah, I
Lucky, not
mean,
lucky, not lucky. Yeah.
I work really hard on, it's like I have to do everything really well, but I
Yeah.
feel like I'm holding on to body fat because I feel my body is sequestering the mold in body fat and unable to release it and
Yeah.
like
Okay.
properly because it would be releasing it back into my system. Do you
What's
see
a
people
toxin?
holding on to weight?
Yes, but it also affects leptin mold. It
Tell
increased.
me
So,
more.
oh yeah, okay. This is all right. I'm just studying. I'm just studying mold myself now, right?
Okay.
So, so leptin is our satiety hormone, isn't it?
Hmm.
Okay. It depletes. So it depletes it.
Yeah, I
It
have low
depletes.
leptin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's going to cause issues. What with satiety and weight gain? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you can have low leptin and still have weight gain. So you can also have low leptin and the low leptin is because you're like too underweight. So it can correspond that way. But sometimes like what I'm seeing in my practice, because I'm starting to test leptin in more of my clients and learn more about it myself as it relates to light and circadian rhythms. And
Yeah,
it's such a master hormone, like because
yeah.
once leptin downregulates, because that's giving the read of like it's safe out there, or it's like no, it's not good out there, there's scarcity, there's tigers, there's famine. So that's giving that read to the body like leptin is low, things are going wrong, let's slow everything down so it'll
Interesting.
then downregulate thyroid and
Yeah,
like other things as well. So I see
yeah.
a lot of low leptin people who often have hypoglycemia because their body doesn't think it has any stored energy, so it doesn't think to use it between meals. But yeah, I
Yeah,
could see
interesting.
how. So yeah,
Yeah, so
leptin,
I'm doing a course at the
it's
moment just
depletes.
on
Yeah.
mold.
Yeah.
It's just I just need to be able to understand it more. I probably never treat it. I'll always outsource, but I just am interested in it. And it was talking
It's so
about leptin.
good.
I can just pick. I'm just diagnosing it. Or
Yeah.
I just diagnose it all the time. I never
The
wanted to
mold.
get it. Yeah, it was not an
I
area of
know.
interest I wanted to do when I first graduated. But if
Yeah.
you are a naturopath long enough, and if you specialize in histamine methylation, you have to know about it. So you need to be able to
Same.
detect it in your patients and refer to someone who's really good at it, because these people are very very unwell, and
Hmm.
it can go missed forever if you don't pick it up. I feel like if I don't pick it up, they won't believe it, or they'll get gaslighted, and it's like, no, this is a real problem for you. And so with
Yeah.
me, it's just like there's certain like 15 causes of high histamine, really. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, I just go through my mind. I'm like, God, you don't have SIBO, and you don't have this, and you don't have that, and you're a man. There's no estrogen problem. I'm like, wow, like it's actually mold. And then it's just like if there's exposure and known exposure and water damaged buildings, it's like it's a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you talk about like why do some people have issues with mold and other people don't? Like even people in the same exact
Hmm.
household,
Yeah.
why how does that come to be?
Yeah, interesting. It is a known, there is, you can have a genetic mutation. Don't ask me what it is. I should know. I've been studying
It's
it. There are
not a test.
there's a gene mutation. You'll be easily able to find. Dr. Shoemaker, he's a mold
Yes, the
guru.
Shoemaker
He'll have it
protocol.
all there, right? There are two genes in particular that people have that really hinder their ability to detoxify mold. And there's a lot of
Mm,
research with mold illness and SIRS and that gene. So some
mm,
people simply genetically can't process mold properly. That's a
okay.
big, yeah. And then I
Yeah.
just also think potentially pre-existing health issues
Yeah.
would be contributing.
Yeah.
So if you've already got sluggish bile and bile issues, then mold's
Mm,
not going to help you at all.
no.
You would fare worse from someone that had a great liver, great gallbladder,
Right.
right? And
So
then women,
let's
and then the immune, it's just the women's immune system's so complex. Maybe it affects women more than men. I'm not sure. If you've already
mm,
got, some, it disrupts the microbiome so much. So if you've already got a really disrupted microbiome, you might do worse.
mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah,
complex, but
it is. Yeah.
genetically there are genes that people can have whereby they're way more susceptible to having an issue with mold.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's circle back to methylation.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I think a lot of people have heard about. And how does this like what is methylation, like in the simplest terms, for someone who's, not a scientist, not a
Yeah.
practitioner?
Yeah.
What is methylation? Why is it important? How do we improve it?
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Yeah. So methylation is a biochemical process in the body, okay, whereby a methyl group, okay, so a methyl group, it doesn't really matter. It's just a carbon with three hydrogens, right? It's got a spare arm. So we've got these methyl groups. They're super important. Our body makes lots of methyl groups, and we can
Mm-hmm.
get methyl groups from our methyl donors from our diet as well, okay?
Mm-hmm.
These methyl groups are like on-off switches. And they go around the body and they switch on and off your enzymes, your neurotransmitters, hormones, DNA and RNA. Like super complex, right? But they're like, go on, go off. You need to go on, you need to go off, which is important. Where
Mm-hmm.
everything's on off. Imagine if adrenaline was on all day. Well, I mean,
Oh,
some people it is, but you need to turn it on, you need to turn it off, right? So it's like
okay.
an on-off switch, okay? And it's
Mm-hmm.
involved in, look, at its core, it's involved in DNA and RNA replication, right? So it's fundamental for life, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, wow, that's a really big deal. We need to think about it clinically, what we can think about it with clinically, okay? There are some key enzymes that methylation works on, right? It works on the COMT enzyme, catechol methyltransferase enzyme. That breaks down estrogen, and it breaks down dopamine, and it breaks down adrenaline. So clinically, we're like, oh, like you got high estrogen, you got high adrenaline, dopamine issues. It's like, what's going on with methylation? It detoxifies histamine, right, via the histamine N-methyltransferase enzyme. So any enzyme that's got an MT at the end is a methyltransferase. It needs a methyl group. So histamine gets broken down by methylation.
Mm-hmm.
Your phospholipids, this is a big deal. Phospholipids, which surround your cell membranes, which create cell membranes,
Yeah.
something like 80% of your methyl groups will be going to make cell membranes. Huge. That, along with energy production, is huge. So they make cell membranes. So we need healthy cell membranes. Okay, so
Yeah.
it also breaks down adrenaline, and it converts serotonin to melatonin. So when
Mm.
we think clinically, okay, well, our patients have stress problems and high adrenaline, they've got estrogen detoxification problems, they've got high histamine, they've got sleep problems. How can methylation be helpful for that person? Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
what can we actually do? I use methylation as a framework. It's just like when I don't go in and try and manipulate methylation. I understand the causes of disrupted methylation, which we see commonly. And the interesting thing about this, the things that cause methylation disruption are the things that cause high histamine. This is why it's all linked. So low hydrochloric acid, you will have B12 deficiency, potentially methionine deficiency, zinc deficiency. You need methionine, you need zinc, you need B12 for methylation. So what's just going on there? SIBO. Forget about an MTHFR gene mutation. If you have SIBO, you might not be absorbing your folate properly. And we need folate to make methylfolate for methylation. Okay, so digestive enzyme can cause high histamine. SIBO can cause high histamine. Both disrupt methylation. Then we've got the mold and oxalate problem, which reduce your homocysteine. And you need homocysteine for methylation.
Okay.
Okay, so
sorry, I had a light bulb for a client who can't sleep, and I think she has mold and she has SIBO, and she's like pounding nuts and seeds, like chia seeds and
oh yeah, just oxalate disaster.
Yeah.
So it's
keep
like
going. Sorry.
So it's like these common things that we see in our patients every day. In my little mind, I'm like, oh, you're just not methylating well. But I don't go, oh my God, you're not methylating well, and take methyls. I hardly ever prescribe methyls, and it can often cause massive side effects. We work on the
What side effects do you see?
Anxiety, depression, panic attacks, suicidal ideation, serious things, worsening of skin conditions.
Really?
Yeah.
I haven't noticed that. So I started taking methylated B vitamins with my mold protocol, and I haven't noticed
That's
anything.
good.
Do you?
Not everybody does, but I'm highly aware that it can. And people that are particularly sensitive to methyls have high histamine. Because taking methyls breaks down histamine, but it's not the cause of why that person has high histamine. And so sometimes when taking methyls, it will come out as an adverse reaction. So you don't just fix methylation by taking a methyl supplement. You have to understand what's going on with the pathways and look at what's going on with the absorption of the methyl donors. You need to understand what is going on with your absorption of methyl donor nutrients. Where is your cache? Are you using too many methyls? Right? Do you know what depletes methyls is stress, big time, and high adrenaline? Unhealthy cell membranes. So what causes that? Viruses, mitochondrial, like oxalates disrupt mold. So it's all of that stuff. So we go in and we just fix all of that stuff. If someone's taking methyls and like, do I feel great on them? I'm like, that's excellent. But sometimes I have people with so many terrible symptoms. I'm like, when did you start the methyls? Did that make you worse? Oh, I think it did. I think it made me worse. Or I feel really anxious. How long have you been taking the methyls? Oh, a week. How long have you been very anxious? Oh, a week. So I'm just really mindful that can actually really happen.
Mindful.
Yeah. Some people are good on them, but I'm just mindful of I just want people to understand that they can cause major adverse reactions. So be careful. And if you have had an adverse reaction, it's not in your head. And some practitioners say keep pushing it. No.
I'm happy you brought that up. And I do know like a lot of my clients who have like pretty intense cases of hypoglycemia issues. I think a lot of them have, there's one in particular who I'm thinking has mold. These are always my extra sensitive clients. And I think that people with, high histamine and these multiple issues where it's like they can't detoxify well. It's just like a lot of the biochemical pathways are just altered.
That's right. They
tend to be the more sensitive ones, and then more sensitive. They're like, I feel too stimulated on this, and so for them, oftentimes with a lot of the supplements, we have to like microdose things because it's like their system can't handle too much.
We have a lot of patients like that. So what I'm saying is, you do not get a methylation test back from a patient or look at their homocysteine levels or think, oh God, they got MTHFR, I've got to give them methyls. It's just you're not doing them any favor. It's not fixing anything. It's not a thing that you go in as a standalone issue.
Okay.
You address why they've got methylation issues. because that will give them, well, they're usually
even if
not,
it's genetic, because I have
it's not, it's usually, look,
yeah.
the thing with the genetic stuff is what, so can you finish that sentence you were saying?
No, I was just saying I have, like double homozygous MTHFR mutations, comped. Like I have all the, poor detox. Like I'm the perfect storm for having, some of these things.
That's
but
right. But
I don't like that to like rule me, but yeah.
No, it's true, but it's always the thing with MTHFR, homozygous in particular, it can cause high homocysteine, which is a cardiovascular risk marker. But not your problem, right?
Luckily,
your problem,
I've never had that.
So the thing with, you've had mold, and that causes havoc with estrogen and havoc with bile and havoc with your gut and havoc with histamine and havoc with everything. So it's always the environment. It's always the environment.
Okay.
It really, really is. So that's good because we can work with it.
Okay. Got it. So let's see. How do we start supporting a better balance of histamine levels? So the body has to break it down. It's not that we want zero, right? Like, because, and I'm assuming
we'll never have zero. We'll never have zero.
Yeah.
No.
What came to my mind is what happens with antihistamines? What are the impacts of having maybe chronically too low histamine, or if the antihistamine?
Yeah, no, I don't think I've ever seen. I don't think that's a thing.
Yeah. Okay. So how do we support healthy levels of histamine?
We have to get to the root cause, very simply. Yeah. Okay. So as I mentioned, digestive enzyme insufficiency. Gluten's a big one, right? Gluten intolerance. So celiac disease, gluten intolerance. SIBO, mold, oxalates, Helicobacter pylori, inflammatory bowel disease, estrogen, hormone imbalance are really the big things. And so doing a low histamine diet will never fix it. It's symptomatic control. That's really important for people to understand. Sometimes you need symptomatic control. For women in particular who've got hormone imbalance, which is going to take 3 months to balance their hormones, they would do well on a low histamine diet during that time.
Okay.
Until,
so we can use it as a tool.
Yes.
But it's not, it doesn't
fix.
It's almost like a hack, not healing.
Totally. And I don't do it very often. It's just this, look, if someone's living in mold and they can't get out for a while, then yes, low histamine is going to help somewhat, just maybe help with some of their symptoms, or if their hormones are out of balance.
Yeah.
Right. But we have to get to the root cause. So I do a lot of SIBO testing. I do a lot of organic acids testing. Okay. So what's going on with SIBO? I'm really honing in on digestive enzymes. That's just clinical picture to me, signs and symptoms, and, usually they need them. How do we balance hormones? Is there a mold problem? Is there an oxalate problem? And we're fixing that and reducing the body's, getting to the cause and reducing the output of histamine.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, that's just fundamental what you need to do.
Yeah. A lot of people are take DAO or DAO enzymes. Do you find that to be helpful, or
in some instances, some people, so for instance, if you have celiac disease, they often have blunted microvilli. They probably do need to take it long term. I generally use it as to help reintroduce foods. I'll use SIBO for an example. With SIBO, I put people on a SIBO low histamine diet to help and then work on SIBO, get rid of SIBO, the digestive enzymes and all the herbs for SIBO. Then we start to reintroduce FODMAP foods. A lot of people were getting histamine issues from FODMAPs. They're like, why do I have histamine reaction to broccoli or too much cabbage or garlic and stuff? It's just like the FODMAPs are feeding the SIBO, it's releasing histamine. So we fix SIBO, reintroduce the FODMAPs, and I'm good. If someone was particularly sensitive to histamine foods, I'll say take the DAO enzyme and have some tomato and see if you tolerate it. If you do, try it without. Okay, so I use it to reintroduce foods, particularly if the symptom is debilitating, like a migraine for 3 days and you've got to get off work or something like that.
Yeah.
Or if people
Yeah.
they're like halfway through the protocol and life happens, they're going overseas, they're getting married or whatever. These people just have life, don't they? SIBO can take like 3 months to get rid of. So if someone is like, I'm going overseas and I have to park this protocol for now, the DAO enzyme can help. It does work. It's very efficacious. It does help a lot. But it can be used just to help break down histamine. But it's interesting. Usually, if you get to the cause quickly, you can help so much that you don't need to take it. It's expensive, and they might have another 10 supplements that they need to take instead. Saccharomyces boulardii increases DAO enzyme activity, which is very helpful. Okay, so sometimes taking Saccharomyces boulardii after a meal can help just increase DAO. We could take it before. And it's also doing all the wonderful things it does, like increasing inflammation in the gut, etc. So it's case by case, but it's not necessarily the supplement. They're like, oh, you absolutely need to go and take DAO enzyme, because I'm working on freeing up the histamine. My first job is to reduce the histamine bucket as quickly as possible.
Okay.
And therefore, they often don't actually need to take it.
Okay. Have you ever noticed, or do you recommend this to your clients to use grounding as a strategy to reduce histamine?
Oh, the health stress. Oh, okay, this is my new thing, Danielle. So stress causes massive issues with histamine. Sorry, I didn't get to that. As a practitioner, I think when you first start, you're so interested in the tools of your trade and how does vitamin D work and how does iron work and what's my SIBO protocol and all this stuff, right? What do I do about adverse reactions to methyls? And you're just overwhelmed with all that stuff. You learn. I've been doing it 10 years now. Honestly, I sit there and I'm like, where is your stress coming from? Where's the trauma? Where's the stress? Is it acute? Is it chronic? Where's it coming from? And who do you need to see as alongside me to deal with this all the time?
Yeah.
And they have, they have massive histamine issues. Very simply, they're in fight and flight. They're not in rest and digest. Okay. They're increasing cortisol. It will increase histamine. But there's way more complexity to this scenario that I need to learn. It's called the Gupta program, which is I'm sure it's a US-based thing. Gupta works on recalibrating the nervous system, and he markets to people with all like mast cell activation syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, all the histamine oxalate mold-driven conditions. And he works on nervous system recalibration. There's a lady called Irene Lyon. I'm sending a lot of patients off to her. Yeah. And they're having amazing results. So, yes, how I'm not 100%. It would be extremely complex how it's working, but quite simply, you're in chronic fight and flight. You have nervous system disruption. It disrupts your gut. It disrupts your immune system. It disrupts your nervous system. Therefore, histamine will be released as part of that process. So I'm referring people to do all sorts of things.
Okay. So I'm specifically referring to something that is in the quantum biological realm, so not biochemistry. So talking about when we ground, we soak in electrons immediately from the ground. Those electrons go down the electron transport chain and create ATP and cellular water in our body. And what we find is that I'm not sure if you're familiar with Gerald Pollack's work about EZ water, exclusion zone water, but there's this layer of water that's negatively charged that surrounds every single surface. That's okay. Every single surface in our bodies. And that exclusion zone is when the water is made by our mitochondria, it splits into positive and negative. And that negative zone, that's called the exclusion zone because it literally keeps things out of the cell. So a degrading in health actually degrades that exclusion zone. And when we degrade that exclusion zone and we don't have that protection from the water, our body perceives like it's a stress response, and histamine is released as a result. So by stepping on the ground, you can also get electrons. You get electrons from food. You get it from sunlight, but increased sunlight can cause a histamine thing. So grounding, even while in the shade, using infrared light. I have literally a panel on my stomach right now as we're speaking. It increases the infrared light as well. It increases that exclusion zone, and helps a lot of people reduce histamine reactions. So it's not only a nervous system thing; it is through this cool
That's
water in our
fascinating.
bodies.
That's
So
fascinating. I want you to
yeah,
send me
I have a
info on
feeling
that.
you'd.
Yeah, no, send
Yeah,
me
yeah,
info on all of that. Like totally. That's
yeah,
yeah, for sure. Like so
yeah. I
anything
will.
that's yeah, so it's working on the nervous system, yeah?
No, it's working on. It's not nervous system. It's just at a
Cellular
subcellular
level. Yeah,
level,
fascinating.
and it's based on the charge in our body. So yeah. Anyway,
Fascinating.
it's pretty cool. So
Yeah,
I'll send you information on
yeah,
it. But
please do.
um, can you? One thing I feel like we didn't talk about, which is maybe foundational that people are like wanting to know, what foods are high in histamine?
Oh, okay.
And do you have to react to, it's like, okay, if I react to every one of these foods, I have histamine issues. Can you react to some, not others? Let's dive in.
Yeah, okay. So there are foods that actually contain histamine, which are fermented foods. Um,
Hmm.
Kimchi, sauerkraut, fish sauce, soy sauce, etc.
Apple cider vinegar?
It's a funny one, you
Mm.
know. People say that it's not high histamine. I can't. I think that it is. Yeah. People say that well,
It's,
vinegar is high histamine. People say apple cider vinegar is not high histamine. I think it is.
I think
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah,
I
it's
think a lot of
funny.
people react to it as
No,
if
it's
it
really
is
funny
too.
because yeah. And then
Yeah.
things like cured meats, tinned fish,
Hmm.
aged cheeses.
Hmm.
Okay. Eggplant, tomato, spinach, avocado contain histamine. All the nice things.
Hmm. Hmm.
Alcohol, obviously. Peanuts, cashews are high histamine. Chocolate, high histamine.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so there's just foods that will do contain histamine. There are other food groups that liberate histamine from the body, and there are foods that decrease DAO.
Hmm.
Um, don't ask me to name all of those because
Yeah.
I just don't focus
That's
on.
okay.
I'm not reductionist like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then we have foods for like FODMAPs
Mm.
have the ability to release histamine in the body because they cause SIBO, or they're feeding SIBO. And
That's right.
people will
Okay.
have histamine reactions often.
Mm.
Then oxalates will cause a massive release of histamine because they're so inflammatory. They're tiny, sharp little
Mm.
crystals. I mean, they do cause kidney stones. If anyone's looked at a kidney stone, under a microscope, or even not under a microscope, it's super sharp. Oxalates
Mm.
are super sharp. They deposit in the gut and in the joints, all throughout the body, muscle. They can get in the thyroid, the brain, and they stimulate inflammation and they release a lot of histamine. So oxalate
Mm.
foods can increase the release of histamine in the body. So
Wow.
it's complex. And, one of the hardest things we deal with as practitioners is people with multiple food intolerances. It's very
Yeah.
difficult. I don't think you can do a reductionist approach to it. You just have to be what is going on with your biochemistry in your gut rather than looking
Hmm.
at all the different food groups. Because,
Yeah.
what also happens when you don't have enough sulfur is you can't break down salicylates. So it's just very problematic. So it's
Mm.
like what are the signs and symptoms? What are the possible root causes? What testing can we do? And then we need to go, actually, your histamine issue is really coming from oxalates. You might have a bit of SIBO, but it's not that problematic. It's oxalates that are the big problem for you, for instance. We need to work out first of all, what is the major disruptor and work with
Hmm.
that. Because these people can't eat
Okay.
anything.
Yeah.
So you have
Yeah.
to come up,
And
in my mind, I have to think about what it is that they can eat, how they can tolerate those foods.
mhm.
It's really important. So it's quite
Yeah.
difficult when there's multiple food intolerances.
Yeah. Let's go back to oxalates, which we said we would come back to really quickly. How do we start to get these out? Because foods that are high in oxalates, almonds, spinach is off the charts, Swiss chard, rhubarb, I mean, turmeric, like it's beets, it's in a lot of things. Chia seeds, very high. I have everyone switch to basil seeds because those aren't as high. But we can't just pull out all these
No.
oxalates at once, right? How do
Okay.
you go
So
about
the
this?
ideal, what we need to understand about oxalate is that we need a healthy microbiome to break down oxalate.
Okay.
We also need calcium and magnesium to bind oxalate. When we consume oxalate, even the simple act of chewing, especially juicing, detaches the oxalate from the calcium and from the potassium. So oxalate's bound to potassium, oxalate's bound to calcium. That will detach, then you have free oxalate, which is the problem. So free oxalate's in the back.
Juicing spinach.
It's a disaster.
Oh my god.
It's super high histamine too.
Oh my god.
So we need, so you need to poop. You need to replenish, help grow back the microbiome, which is a hard thing to do. I mean, I think clinically people come to me and they're like, oh, I just want to grow back my microbiome. I mean, we both know it's really difficult, right? That maybe prebiotics fibers. Reducing oxalate foods at 5 to 10% a week, keeping a food and symptoms diary is what you need to do. Okay. You also should take calcium magnesium citrate before meals to bind up any of the oxalate that you might have. And you need to replenish your electrolytes because oxalates deplete your electrolytes. It's hard. Some people are easy. And some people are very, very difficult. Now, if you feel a dumping symptom, which is a worsening of any of your symptoms, or oxalates can come out in your skin as little shards.
Yeah, they say it feels kind of like sandy, or you can see it when you pee.
And out of your eyes. So you know if you're dumping oxalate, you then can eat some oxalate to stop the dumping.
Yes.
It's tricky.
My
and I
client does 2 tea bags like every morning of like black tea. Like it's a thing to like slow down the dumping.
Yeah. So I find if you can find a practitioner to work with, you really should. It's really tricky.
Yeah. Wow.
The problem I have is people come to me and they've removed all the oxalates from the diet, all of them. And they've gone through significant dumping. It's very hard. What's up, what's down? It's hard. That's hard. Like, so if anyone listening to this, go and see a practitioner that can help you, because if you do it on your own and you stuff it up, it's so hard for that practitioner to fix it. It's just hard. It's hard, right? Because you're trying to find stability. And also, it's complex because the brain's all involved in this as well, really. And then also oxalates, so the human body makes oxalates as well, right? And oxalates get detoxified.
Our gut bacteria make it.
Yeah, it's actually glycine and hydroxyproline. So the 2 amino acids, they're very abundant in collagen. I'm just going to use this as an example. Collagen gets broken down. It gets broken down in the liver into what's called glyoxylate. Glyoxylate can then get converted into oxalate and be excreted in the urine when everything's working properly. Okay. Glyoxylate can also convert back into glycine, because glycine can be used for other things in the body with the use of B6. And then what can happen is if you are breaking down too much glycine and hydroxyproline, you don't have enough B6, your kidney function's not working properly, or you've got too many oxalates coming through from the gut, right, into the bloodstream and then going into the liver, the urine, you will build up oxalates in the kidney urine tract, and that causes the urinary symptoms. Bladder pain, vulvodynia, frequent urination. Yeah. It's a complex thing, oxalates. Wow. And I would highly recommend people to find a practitioner that is up to speed with it, because it's tricky.
Yeah.
And I have Melanie who works for me, who went through this all herself. So there's a lot of nuances. I mean, I can talk about the biochemistry all day, but each person is unique to what they need. Also bile disrupts calcium metabolite. Bile binds up calcium. So if you've got disrupted bile, too much bile, it can bind up your calcium, which will hinder your binding of oxalate. People
so if you have too much bile?
Yeah, people that go keto, I've seen a lot of people on ketogenic diets end up with oxalate problems.
And also a lot of the keto foods, because a lot of these are low-carb foods. they go spinach, almonds,
Yeah.
almond flour,
Almond meal, almond
like
flour, almond butter, all the
yep,
almonds.
dark
Yeah.
chocolate.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
So,
lot of those things. So
yeah.
sometimes, yeah, okay,
Yeah, so
interesting.
it's
It's a puzzle.
complex, yeah, and I think
Yeah.
I think nutritional medicine is extraordinarily powerful,
Mm-hmm.
and I do just think humans are like, oh well, I eat food every day, I can manage this myself, but it's
Yeah.
actually it's so powerful, and you can make you can make remarkable improvements to your health if done
Mm-hmm.
correctly, and you can really do a number on yourself if you don't. So you got to
Yeah.
take it very
Because
serious.
even
You got to
these,
take it very seriously and get advice from the right people. Not do fad things, because what might be good for someone might not be good for you. Keto is great for some people.
yeah,
Intermittent fasting is great for some people, but not necessarily for you. So you need an
right.
individualized approach. Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for this. This was so much great information. And do you work with people in the US
Yes,
as
yes,
well?
yes, yes. So
Okay.
I
Awesome.
see US based patients.
Mm-hmm.
One on one. I've also got a practitioner training course. So if
Mm.
practitioners are interested, I run a group coaching program. I'm probably going to run it at the beginning of next year. So I've got an
Okay.
application. If people are interested, there's an application form on my website, which is just joannekennedy.naturopathy.com. And I've
Mm-hmm.
also got an ebook and a simple video. I don't even like calling it a masterclass. It sounds too complex. It's an ebook. It's like 90-page ebook on histamine
Mm-hmm.
intolerance, all the causes and treatment options, and then 32 sort of short videos. Just sort of explain
Okay.
this, and that's available for sale on my website. And it's not too taxing for people to kind of go through
Yeah.
that. It's not like a big course. It's quite easy for people.
Bite-sized, digestible.
It's very digestible.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do
Good.
see them. I mean,
Amazing.
it's true. I've got a lot of American patients. I'm a big fan of Americans, so I love working with them, and I can get all the testing pretty much organized for them from here too, which is great.
Amazing. That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thanks,
And
Danielle.
yeah, and we'll make sure to link everything in the show notes. So if you guys want to follow along with Joanne and work with her or her team, it sounds like I'm happy to have you as a resource to refer people to and to
Wonderful.
confer on some clients for sure, because I have a lot of people who now there's little question marks in my mind. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks.